get ready to dive into the story. Let's jump right in! A man was seen breathing heavily, his hand gripping his shoulder as he stared up, his thoughts consumed by a desperate desire to survive. All he could think about was escaping. Struggling to walk down the hallway, he leaned against the wall, clutching his blade tightly, sweat dripping from his body. He couldn't understand why he was the one enduring this nightmare. Eventually, the man stumbled and fell face first to the ground, letting out a cry of surprise and pain as his sword slipped from his grasp. He coughed, desperately trying to push himself up, but his body trembled from exhaustion. In a weak attempt, he called out for help, hoping someone would hear, but his cries went unanswered. Again, he collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down his face, as he wished for someone to save him. At that moment, it seemed like someone did hear his pleas, but it wasn't the kind of help he had hoped for. A creature with massive black wings and glowing purple eyes approached him. It was an elite demon, far beyond his strength as a low-tier challenger in the area. Despite his shaking body, the man Yoshido struggled to rise again, grabbing his blade. Even though he was drained, he muttered bitterly to himself about how miserable his life had become, how he had been tormented, looked down upon, and abandoned. With a shout, he demanded to know if the demon found amusement in his suffering. His eyes began to glow with a fierce determination as he held his blade forward, refusing to give up, no matter what. The demon loomed above him, but Yoshido kept going, shouting that even if the world had forsaken him, he had no choice but to keep moving forward. He charged, leaping into the air in a desperate attempt to strike the demon. But as he anticipated, the creature was much faster, retaliating with a strike that shattered Yoshido's sword and tore through his body. Pain surged through him, and despite the agony, he smiled weakly, realizing how much it hurt. Tears filled his eyes as the demon summoned a powerful glowing purple attack. The blast barely missed him, instead striking the ground beneath him. Yoshido recognized that the blast had hit too close for comfort, but it was too late for him to react or escape. The inevitable fall was already set in motion. He glanced up at the demon, whose grin widened as Yoshido tumbled down, the floor crumbling beneath him. His final thoughts were that he would become a stronger challenger. This was only the beginning, even if it had already started. With a final scream, Yoshido plummeted to his death. The magic tower was an enigmatic structure, beyond human comprehension. It was the term commonly used for tower, like dungeons that appeared suddenly all around the world. The interior resembled a world pulled straight from a game, filled with swords, magic skills, monsters, magic stones, and treasures. The treasures found within the dungeons were highly coveted and traded at sky-high prices, and those who sought them were known as challengers. However, delving into such dungeons was a dangerous endeavor, and although it seemed like a game, death within the magic tower was real. There was no respawning outside of it. Yoshido opened his eyes and immediately realized that he had died again. This wasn't his first death. Far from it. Things weren't supposed to go this way, but he possessed a skill called infinite revival, which allowed him to come back to life, no matter how many times he died inside the magic tower. However, as he lay there, something clicked in his mind, and he cursed under his breath as the realization hit him. He had been deceived. Before all this, Yoshido had graduated from high school and lived a quiet life, working part-time jobs. But then the magic tower appeared, and he thought it would offer him a chance to change his life if he became a challenger. Every day became a battle to obtain magic stones and treasures, so he sought a rare skill that no one else had. The infinite revival skill was sold by a merchant at the entrance to the magic tower, and Yoshido had spent all of his savings and even taken on debt to purchase it. The skill made him immortal within the tower, but at a price. Each time he was revived, his abilities were weakened due to a penalty tied to the skill. Yoshido had died 4 times so far. The first time his defense was reduced by 50%, from 53 to just 3, leaving him vulnerable to a single blow. The second time, his attack by 70%, and his health was reduced by 250. The third time, the penalty was random, and now his agility was reduced to a mere 1 point. causing him to laugh bitterly at how mentally drained he was from the whole ordeal. In the Magic Tower, a person's body structure was dependent on their stats, so as his agility dropped, his body became heavier and harder to move. Eventually, if his agility reached 0, he would be unable to continue as a challenger. Yoshido was now burdened with crushing debt and a worthless skill, leaving him feeling utterly frustrated. His eyes snapped open, and he slowly rose to his feet, the weight of his body pressing down on him. He took a moment to look around, assessing where he had fallen. The atmosphere felt different. He noticed a faint light at the end of the hall, and as he focused on it, his breath caught in his throat. It was the glow of an ultra-rare skill stone. This stone could be sold for an enormous sum, possibly enough to pay off his debt. It was his only hope, and he was determined to obtain it, no matter the cost. Yoshido got up and glanced around, relieved to see no monsters in sight. For a moment, he thought it would be an easy win, but, as usual, things were far from what he expected. He immediately triggered a floor trap, and the wall in front of him slid open. Hundreds of knives shot out, stabbing into his body and killing him once again, further reducing his strength. Gasping for air, Yoshido stared up, stunned at how weak he had become, dying from a single trap. But this wouldn't be the end for him. He gritted his teeth and stumbled toward the wall, only to activate yet another trap. A dragon statue emerged from the ground, breathing a blast of fire that incinerated him, reducing his health once more. He revived again, barely escaping the flames by rolling away and leaping forward. The narrow passage he was in was designed specifically to lure challengers in and kill them with its deadly traps. Under normal circumstances, no one could pass through it, regardless of how many lives they had. But Yoshido wasn't just anyone. Even though he was the weakest in the tower, he had an endless supply of alternate lives to spare. He dashed forward, activating trap after trap, losing count of how many times he had died. His body had long since stopped feeling anything, and his vision began to blur. His consciousness felt as though it was slipping away. Yet, this was Yoshido's victory. The system then prompted him, asking if he wanted to use the skill's stone. Since he didn't respond, it was used automatically, and within seconds, he gained the inversion skill. As soon as the skill was activated, he began to stir, feeling stronger and his mind clearing. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't experience the death penalty's effects. Confused, Yoshido checked his status, only to be stunned by what he saw. All the negative effects from his previous deaths had been reversed into positive buffs. Another system message popped up, notifying him that he had acquired the inversion skill. The message explained that this skill would reverse all effects, including buffs, debuffs, and status abnormalities. As the realization set in, Yoshido understood that the inversion skill had turned all the debuffs he had accumulated from infinite revival into powerful buffs. He couldn't remember when he had gained this skill, but as he sat down and thought about it, something caught his eye. He glanced at the box containing the golden powder, the rare skill stone he had seen earlier. It dawned on him that it must have been automatically used. His heart sank, and he let out a dramatic cry, realizing he could no longer sell it for a small fortune. However, after a moment of reflection, he realized that this might not be such a bad thing. With the inversion skill, every time he died, the penalties from infinite revival would now turn into boosts. This meant that he would only grow stronger with each death. With this newfound power, Yoshido felt as though he could finally rise to the top as a challenger. Yoshido's goal was clear. He wanted to become the strongest challenger, earn a fortune, and gain fame. But, for the moment, he put those thoughts aside and glanced behind him, wondering if he'd need to retrace his steps to return home. A cold sweat ran down his face as he saw the challenge ahead. The instant death traps had reset to their pre-activated state, meaning they would trigger again as soon as he got close. He couldn't help but wonder if he would be killed once more by those traps. He shouted out loud, voicing his frustration. He didn't want to die again. He knew it would be painful, and though he could be revived, the agony was unbearable. He feared that if he died too many times in a row, he would lose his sanity. His hand instinctively gripped his shoulder as he calmed down, reminding himself of the one thing that kept him going. His current stats were now double what they had been before, thanks to the inversion skill. With these new abilities, he might just be able to face the traps head-on. There seemed to be no other way back home, and he had no choice but to give it a try. Yoshido dashed forward, his heart racing. To his surprise, he was able to dodge the traps this time. The instant death traps, which had once been too fast for him to react to, now moved at a pace he could see and evade. He realized that all he had to do was be faster than them. Yoshido ran past each trap with ease, feeling more confident than ever. When the traps became too slow, he breezed through them. Next, he faced the dragon statue, but with a swift motion, he summoned his blade and destroyed it. As the traps continued, he activated the next one, and sliced through a barrage of knives that came flying toward him. A satisfied sigh escaped his lips. Yoshido now knew for certain that the combination of the inversion skill and the penalties from infinite revival could turn him into the strongest challenger. With renewed resolve, he pressed on. Eventually, he made it back to the place where he had fallen earlier. Looking up, he saw just how high the hole was. If it had been the old him, climbing back up would have been impossible. But now, with his enhanced strength, he could do it. The ground cracked beneath his feet as Yoshido dashed forward, leaping up the walls, gaining height with each bound. Finally, with one powerful leap, he shot through the hole where he had fallen earlier. The demon was still there, waiting. Yoshido sarcastically apologized for making it wait, then landed gracefully before clashing swords with the elite demon. The demon swung at him, but Yoshido easily dodged and taunted it, asking if it wanted to try killing him again. In response, the demon let out a furious roar. With a determined glint in his eyes, Yoshido grinned and declared that he would play along with the demon's single life, wondering how long it could last against his infinite lives. Yoshido charged forward at the demon, which was already preparing its next attack. The demon swiped at him with its claws, but Yoshido effortlessly dodged, moving toward the demon's arm. For a moment, he marveled at how his stats had increased, giving him a new sense of strength. With a swift slash, he cut through the demon's arm, causing it to howl in pain. Yoshido smirked, telling the demon that its attacks no longer scared him. In the next moment, he punched the demon with all his might, sending it flying into the distance. Debris flew everywhere as Yoshido watched, knowing that this was his victory. As the smoke cleared, Yoshido saw a glowing purple orb of energy. It was then that he realized the demon was still alive. Dodging to the side, he let out a sigh of relief, but his mind began to race, thinking about something that had been bothering him recently. The more he considered it, the more it didn't make sense. This elite demon didn't seem like any typical third-floor monster. The higher one climbed in the tower, the stronger the monsters became, and by that logic, the third floor should only have weak monsters. Yet here he was, facing a creature far more powerful than it should be. The demon spread its wings and attempted to swipe at Yoshido, but he dodged once again, realizing he had a real chance against it. His stats had drastically improved due to the death penalties, and now he was far stronger than he had been. As he leapt into the air, Yoshido pondered just how strong this demon must be. Likely stronger than most of the challengers on this floor, which made its presence here all the more unusual. It was a monster he had never encountered before. He continued to clash with the demon, growing more exhausted with each exchange. Between his breaths, he called out, asking what the creature was, but it only glared at him fiercely, not responding. As expected, the demon remained silent. Unfortunately for the demon, it was facing an opponent whose strength had grown exponentially, and Yoshido knew it was time to end this fight. The demon began summoning energy balls again, one in each hand. Yoshido watched carefully, and that's when he noticed the color of the energy had shifted. To his surprise, the demon now conjured a dark sword, and it was clear that things were about to get more intense. With a screech, the demon launched itself at Yoshido, sending multiple slashes his way. Yoshido struggled to keep up with the speed of the attacks. The demon then flew behind him, and the two clashed blades, their strikes causing the ground beneath them to crack. Yoshido realized that victory was close. He was beginning to outpace the demon. However, as he glanced to the side, he saw the demon preparing another energy ball. Yoshido cursed under his breath, realizing too late that the attack was coming. The energy ball struck him, and he was killed once more. The system notified him that his penalty was a reduction in strength. Yet, before he could even process it, the inversion skill activated, reversing the penalty. Yoshido rose to his feet and charged at the demon, slashing with his blade. He pushed the demon back several yards. Gritting his teeth, Yoshido asked how the demon had the audacity to kill him, especially since the pain was unbearable. The demon was forced back step by step as Yoshido's strikes grew stronger, powered by the inversion skill's buffs. But even with the newfound strength, it still didn't seem like enough to end the fight. The two clashed blades again, but this demon's sword energy exploded with immense power, killing Yoshido once again. This time, his agility was debuffed, but as expected, inversion reversed it, and his eyes glowed with renewed determination. Looking the demon in the eye, Yoshido commented that it fought well before dashing forward. The demon swiped at him with its claws, but Yoshido swiftly cut through its body. The demon's reaction was delayed, and it slowly realized it had been defeated. Yoshido stood tall, knowing the battle was over. He declared that the demon never stood a chance from the start, its limited life making it impossible to win. As he turned away, he casually mentioned that even if they ended up in the underworld or anywhere else, no matter how many lives the demon gained, it would never defeat him. Yoshido hoped that someday they would meet again, and when that time came, he wanted to have a fair fight. Letting out a breath of relief, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment after managing to defeat the elite demon. However, frustration soon followed as he cursed under his breath, remembering that he had been killed twice by this demon, despite the newfound strength he had gained. Glancing down at his battered sword, Yoshido let out a sound of disbelief when he noticed that the blade was cracking further, becoming almost useless. He quickly realized that he needed a sturdier weapon. Getting to his feet, he muttered aloud that he should collect magic stones from the tower and use the money to buy a new weapon. Once he made it out to the first floor. The first floor of the magic tower was known as the safe area. The entrance to each floor had a section where no monsters appeared, offering a place for adventurers to rest and recover. It was here that people could buy or sell equipment and items. In fact, it was the very reason Yoshido found himself in this situation. After gathering enough funds, he was able to purchase a new sword, one made of silver. The high price made sense given its material. As Yoshido held the new weapon, a tear welled in his eye, mourning the fact that most of the magic stones he had gathered were nearly spent. However, he quickly dismissed these thoughts, choosing to focus on the fact that he was taking a step toward his rise. He considered the sword an investment, an initial step forward. Just then, he overheard some chattering in the background. He listened intently and realized that people were talking about him, about how he was the guy who had been tricked into buying the infinite revival skill. Some were mocking him, while others seemed to pity him. Yoshido chuckled to himself, realizing they were gossiping about him, but it also irked him. None of these people had warned him before he supposedly fell for the trick. What they didn't know was that infinite revival was far from useless, especially now that he had inversion. For other challengers, the skill might seem pointless, but for him, with his unique abilities, it was a god-tier power. Yoshido grinned, a sense of pride swelling within him. He chuckled to himself, thinking about how much stronger he had become. Suddenly, a loud shout broke through his thoughts. Yoshido turned toward the noise, seeing a group of people gathered around. They were discussing their plans to challenge the mid-boss room on the 5th floor. The leader of the group, a man named Nishi, stood at the front. Yoshido's eyes narrowed as he recognized him. With a heavy sigh, Yoshido recalled that Dominator was a title given to those who had successfully challenged the boss room at the top of the magic tower. The magic tower would vanish once the boss on the top floor was defeated, and those who succeeded in defeating it would be granted powerful, unique equipment. Dominators, the ones who had conquered the toughest bosses, were often respected by the other challengers. However, Nishi, despite his title, wasn't exactly someone Yoshido held in high regard. As Yoshido hummed in thought, he soon realized who Nishi was arguing with. A blonde woman with pink hair stood across from him, her voice sharp as she criticized Nishi, saying that he was just another person who managed to challenge a low-tier magic tower, and that anyone could do the same. Another woman, Shiramashi Yui, approached the blonde, who was named Sakiyamana, and gently suggested that fighting wasn't the best course of action. Mana, however, snapped at Yui, telling her to back off and let her handle it. They had found the mid-boss room first, and she wasn't about to let someone like Nishi steal their rewards for clearing the dungeon. Yui, with a more measured response, suggested that maybe it would be better to let Nishi take the rewards, which caused Mana to fall silent. Her expression conflicted. Nishi, clearly pleased with himself, spoke up, his grin practically punchable, as he declared that the matter was settled. He confidently boasted that he would easily clear the boss with his shield, the Ease Mimus, which was claimed to block any attack. His group of men laughed, their egos inflated by their high levels and confidence. However, the situation was abruptly interrupted when someone called out to Yui and Mana. It was Yoshido, the dark-haired male they recognized. The two women were taken aback by his sudden appearance, but their surprise quickly turned to confusion as they watched Nishi laugh maniacally at Yoshido. He mocked him for being duped by the merchant into buying a useless skill, taunting him for being the one who had been exploited. Yoshido didn't react to the insults, merely turning to the two women. He suggested that they let Nishi and his group deal with the mid-boss, but Mana was shocked by his words. Yoshido, undeterred, confidently told them that he, along with Yui and Mana, would be the ones to challenge the boss at the top of the tower, moving with such speed that even Nishi and his group couldn't keep up. Yui, confused, asked what Yoshido was talking about, but he assured her that he had a solid plan for victory. Nishi scoffed at this, activating his shield and charging at Yoshido, but the dark-haired male dodged each of Nishi's attacks with ease. Eventually, Yoshido tripped Nishi in front of everyone, leaving the group bewildered. With a smirk, Yoshido walked up to Nishi and asked how long he was going to keep rolling around on the ground, challenging him to show off his supposed dominator skills. Turning to the two women, Yoshido asked if it was time for them to head to the 4th floor of the magic tower. The trio of Yoshido, Yui, and Mana began walking down the halls, with Nishi's group leading the way, since it was Nishi who had wanted to fight the upcoming boss. Mana spoke up, calling Yoshido's attention as she wondered aloud if it was really safe to follow Nishi. Yoshido hummed in response, and the blonde girl continued, expressing her belief that Nishi wasn't as strong as he appeared. Yuri, too, started to voice her concerns, especially since the monsters they had encountered so far had been incredibly strong. The dark-haired male casually interrupted them, offering a calm reassurance, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Yoshido knew that Mana and Yuri were both challengers he had met in the magic tower. Mana was level 15, and Yuri was level 13. Compared to them, Yoshido was only level 8, so their concerns were understandable. But the current Yoshido was far different from the one who had first entered the tower. His stats had increased significantly, and even though his level might seem low, if a fight broke out, he could easily overpower them all. Suddenly, Nishi called out to Yoshido, telling him that while it was fine to watch how they would defeat the mid-boss, Yoshido would need to deal with the weaker enemies. Despite the fear Nishi had initially shown toward Yoshido, the large man seemed to have regained his composure now. Before anyone could respond, strange sounds began to echo all around them. Everyone looked around, and Nishi quickly noticed a lizard-like creature leaping down from above, attempting to slash at him. He managed to block the attack with his shield, and the creature jumped back with a loud roar. Nishi chuckled, stating that this would be easy to fight. However, Yoshido felt a strange unease and tried to caution the group, telling Nishi to wait as something felt off. Before he could finish his sentence, the sounds grew louder, and hundreds of glowing eyes appeared in the shadows above them. More and more lizard men began to leap down from the ceiling, and Nishi's earlier confidence quickly turned to panic. He asked what was happening, but his question was soon answered when all of the blue lizard men bowed to a new figure that stepped forward, a red, scaled lizard man. This was the lizard commander, a superior species of lizard man who commanded the swarm. The lizard commander pointed its blade toward the group and let out a noise that could only be interpreted as a command. Immediately, the blue lizard men pounced on them. Yoshido wiped the sweat from his brow, but despite the overwhelming odds, a huge grin spread across his face as his eyes glowed with excitement. Just as he was about to make a move, Mana called out to Yudi, telling her that they would put all of their effort into protecting Yoshido. The dark-haired male tried to reassure them that he could fight as well, but Mana, gritting her teeth, suddenly shouted at him not to act tough in a situation like this. Her tone was sharp, surprising Yoshido. She explained that these opponents were completely out of his league, and Yoshido clicked his tongue in frustration. Just as he was about to argue, he heard Yudi agree with Mana, urging him to fall back because it was too dangerous. Yoshido also wanted to fight, but he quickly gave up when he realized that everyone saw him as a liability. A bad feeling began to stir within him as the battle raged on. Nishi blocked another strike from a blue lizard man, but before anyone could react, the lizard commander charged in, sending Nishi flying. He rolled back, and a sudden clicking sound rang out. Nishi had landed on a trap, and for some reason, the trap activated right beneath Yoshido. He didn't have time to escape, and immediately began to fall down the hole. The two women called out in concern as Yoshido tumbled down. He couldn't help but wonder why it had to be him who fell, not Nishi. This was Hermes, a magic tower designed to test challengers, and its many traps had been the downfall of many. However, the fall didn't faze Yoshido. His eyes glowed again, and he gritted his teeth, bracing himself. As he fell, he glanced at the floor below, getting closer with each passing moment. In a split second, Yoshido dashed off the side of the hole, using the pillars to guide his descent, and landed on the ground without a scratch. He immediately sensed something behind him. He turned to find hundreds of lizard men surrounding him. Worse yet, there were multiple lizard commanders among them. It was surprising to see such a high concentration of these elite monsters in one area, and it didn't seem like there was anywhere to run. Yoshido muttered aloud, "I knew you wouldn't let me get away." But he wasn't worried. This wasn't a problem at all. With a cold glare, he activated his ability and summoned a weapon. The silver sword he had purchased earlier. Holding the sword firmly, he declared that he'd had enough of all the traps. The lizard men shivered at the chilling aura he exuded, their expressions shifting to one of worry. Yoshido told them it didn't matter how many of them came at him, because they were just going to help him test out his new sword. He made it clear that they'd soon realize what a mistake it was to bring him here. Yoshido stood his ground, eyeing the lizard men surrounding him. He knew that these lizard men were all higher ranking, far stronger than any of the monsters he had faced before. Just a short while ago, he would have been no match for one of these lizard commanders. But now, with his newfound strength, he was confident. One of the lizard commanders leapt into the air to strike him, but Yoshido was ready. With his blade in hand, he clashed against the commander's attack, and with a swift, precise motion, he slashed through the monster, killing it instantly. Yoshido was now confident in his ability to defeat the lizard men. More monsters attempted to pounce on him, but he dodged each attack with ease, spinning his body to slash through them before they could react. After a while, he stopped and panted heavily, standing still as he surveyed his enemies. Glancing at the lizard men, he asked what was up with their behavior, as they were all just standing there. He taunted them, wondering if they weren't the ones who had been waiting for him to fall into their trap. With a grin, he dared them to try and kill him if they could. The lizard men hissed in response, and Yoshido wasted no time. He dashed forward, cutting through his enemies with high-speed precision. He felt exhilarated, finally able to fight properly against this number of opponents. No longer the person who had always been protected. As he fought, he noticed the monsters beginning to pull back, their fear growing with each passing second. Yoshido slowed his attacks, his cold glare intensifying as he noticed their hesitation. "Are you scared of death?" Yoshido asked, his voice filled with mock sympathy. "I know how you feel. I've experienced death many times before this battle." With each slash, the lizard men began to retreat, and as Yoshido cut down the last of them, he walked past their fallen bodies. He stood over the last lizard man, who was shivering in fear, tears welling up in its eyes. Yoshido looked down at it and coldly told it he would finish it off quickly. When the fight was over, Yoshido let out a breath of relief, sweat dripping down his body from the exhaustion of the battle. He had finally taken down all the monsters. As he glanced around, he noticed an arched entrance that led to a set of stairs. These stairs likely led back to the floor he had fallen from. He made his way up, knowing he needed to return to the group he had split from earlier. After a while, Yoshido reached a stone door that opened to the very floor where the others were. He casually walked through the door, hands in his pockets, with an annoyed expression on his face. He muttered to himself about the endless cycle of falling down and climbing back up floors in this tower. Manhwa and Yuri were shocked when they saw him. Yuri frantically ran over to him, inspecting his body for injuries. When she saw that he didn't appear to be hurt, she let out a sigh of relief and gave him a soft smile. "I really wanted to help you," she said, "but I couldn't find any paths leading down at all." While Yoshido's heart was racing as he heard Manhwa's calm voice asking if he had encountered any monsters on the way back up. It wasn't that she didn't care, rather, she was under the impression that Yoshido had simply been there the whole time, unaffected by anything. However, as the question lingered in the air, Yoshido's smile faltered for a moment. His expression darkened, and he quickly masked his true feelings, forcing a fake grin. "No, didn't get attacked at all on the way up," he lied smoothly, his voice casual. He reassured them, making it sound like everything had been fine, though in truth, the lizard commander corpses were still there, far below where they stood, evidence of his battle. He couldn't very well tell them the truth now. Once the topic of the battle had settled, Yoshido shifted his focus to Nishi and the others, wondering what had happened after he had fallen. He was met with hesitation. Manhwa spoke up first, explaining that after Yoshido fell into the trap, she had managed to defeat a group of lizard men, but Nishi, assuming Yoshido was dead, rushed toward the boss room, leaving the trap behind. Yoshido's face softened, but his tone remained even. "Don't get too angry at him. Nishi's always been like that," he said, trying to downplay the situation. "But thanks for worrying about me," he added, his words bringing a small smile to both women's faces. The dark-haired male stood up straighter, his gaze turning toward the path ahead. "We need to hurry. We can still catch up with Nishi and the others." He began to walk forward, but was stopped in his tracks as he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. There, still alive, was a lone lizard man, one that seemed to have slipped through the cracks when Nishi and his group had tried to clear the area. Yoshido's eyes narrowed as he observed it leap into the air, its blade aimed directly at Yuri, who hadn't noticed the incoming danger. "Yudi," Yoshido called out, his voice sharp, as he sprinted toward her with incredible speed. The girl, still caught in confusion, "Danger?" calmly asked Nishi to explain. Nishi, clearly on edge, recognized the aura around them, an aura that only appeared on the top floor of a magic tower. Before he could say more, another magical symbol appeared, and within seconds, a giant monster emerged from the dust, sitting on a throne surrounded by purple flames. This was the boss room. Sitting on the stone throne was the tower's master, the Orc Emperor. Its eyes glowed bright purple as it stared down at the group, letting out a deafening roar. The ground beneath them rumbled, and a chill ran down their spines. Yoshido, still in shock, looked around in disbelief. A system notification then appeared, warning them that they had been forcibly teleported to the top floor boss room. As Yoshido took in the situation, he knew with certainty that they were facing the tower's true master. The Orc Emperor stood up from its throne, its left hand ending in monstrous claws, and its right gripping a long blade. Before anyone could react, the boss leaped off its throne, charging at them with terrifying speed. The group was caught off guard as the Orc Emperor raised its blade, preparing to strike. Everyone quickly dodged as the Orc Emperor's blade tore through the ground effortlessly. Yoshido furrowed his brows in disbelief, his sweat dripping as he realized this monster was on an entirely different level from any enemy he had faced before, except for himself. No one in the room had the stats to take the Orc Emperor head on. Yoshido attempted to shout at Nishi, trying to get his attention. He told him to step back, assuring him that he could handle it, but Nishi, unaware of Yoshido's true abilities, snapped back angrily. "Stop talking nonsense, and just stay quiet. If you keep this up, you'll get yourself killed." Yoshido tried to explain that even if he died, he would just be revived, but Nishi cut him off, giving due to insufficient stats. Nishi's Aegis Mimus ability couldn't activate properly. Yoshido was left in disbelief, staring at the lifeless body of Nishi, the broken shield pieces scattered around him. The rest of Nishi's team cried out for their fallen leader, and Yoshido tried to warn them to stay back. But it was too late. The Orc Emperor swung its blade, cutting down every last one of them in a single, swift strike, their bodies falling to the ground lifelessly. Blood pooled on the floor, and broken pieces of weapons from Nishi's party were scattered across the room, evidence of the brutal battle that had unfolded. The floor was marked with deep cuts from both swords and claws. Yoshido clenched his fist in frustration, turning away and muttering curses under his breath. He felt utterly helpless, unable to protect the people who had just died. His head hung low as the Orc Emperor stood silently in the room, its gaze intense and unyielding. Yudi and Mana, realizing their dire situation, made the decision to run. However, when they turned to flee, they found the exit doors were sealed shut by a glowing red magical symbol. It was clear now. Sealing magic had been placed on the door, trapping them. Their only choices were to fight or die. Yudi felt the weight of despair settle over her as tears welled up in her eyes. Frozen with fear, she stood motionless as the Orc Emperor prepared to strike her down. She resigned herself to the inevitable, believing that this would be the end. But then, sparks of electric blue energy crackled in the air. In an instant, Yoshido sped forward, positioning himself between Yudi and the Orc Emperor. Summoning his silver sword, he blocked the incoming attack with a single, powerful swing. Yudi and Mana stood frozen in shock, unable to believe their eyes. The person who had stepped up to face the beast was none other than Yoshido. The dark-haired male who had always been on the sidelines. He spoke, his voice low but filled with resolve, vowing that no one else would die from now on. His eyes glowed a fierce red, the intensity of his words matching the determination in his gaze. He swore that, even if it cost him his life, he would protect them all. The Orc Emperor, enraged by the interference, swiped its massive claws toward Yoshido, smashing the ground beneath it with a deafening roar. But Yoshido was quick, dodging effortlessly. He charged in, using his silver sword to strike at the monster's arm. However, as he glanced at the wound, his expression darkened. The cut had been too shallow, not enough to truly harm the beast. The Orc Emperor leapt into the air, its next attack coming swiftly. Yoshido narrowly dodged, frowning as he readied himself for the next move, determined not to give up. Yoshido leapt into the air, swinging his sword at the Orc Emperor, but the monster blocked the strike with one of its massive arms. Yudi and Mana watched in silent horror, both of them sweating with worry. Yudi muttered in confusion, unable to comprehend what was unfolding before them. Mana also mumbled in disbelief, as they both realized Yoshido was fighting the boss one-on-one. The two combatants clashed with incredible force, neither one yielding to the other. Despite his enhanced abilities from the death penalty, Yoshido found himself being pushed back by the Orc Emperor. This, he thought, was to be expected from the boss of the Magic Tower. It was clear that he still lacked the necessary stats to defeat such a formidable foe. However, Yoshido wasn't deterred. He knew he had a plan, and his focus shifted to exhausting the monster's stamina. His true strategy was to die a few more times, gradually wearing the boss down, until he could land a final, decisive blow. He mumbled to himself under his breath, though the two women didn't hear him. With renewed determination, Yoshido charged forward, engaging the Orc Emperor in battle again. He managed to chip away at the boss's thick hide, but the monster, infuriated by the attacks, retaliated with full force, sending Yoshido flying through the air. He grunted in surprise as he crashed to the ground. Was this his limit? He wondered. Before he could gather his thoughts, the Orc Emperor's claws tore into his body, ending his life in an instant. Yuri watched in horror, her voice breaking as she screamed upon seeing Yoshido's blood spilling across the floor. The system message appeared, confirming his death and informing him that a permanent debuff, reduced agility, had been applied as part of the death penalty, but Yoshido wasn't worried. He knew the debuff would be reversed immediately due to his inversion skill. Death no longer held any fear for him. He would simply revive until the boss was defeated. True to his expectations, Yoshido's injuries healed in an instant. He rose from the ground, his eyes burning with renewed determination. Yuri and Mana stared in shock, realizing that his infinite revival skill was at work. However, Yuri's concern grew, as she recalled that using this skill came with significant drawbacks. She couldn't help but wonder how Yoshido was able to continue fighting despite the severe consequences of his repeated deaths. Little did they know, it was all part of his inversion skill's power, something Yoshido had yet to fully reveal. Another death occurred, and Yoshido felt the familiar rush of the death penalty. This time, his resistance stat increased by 20 points. However, it wasn't the boost he needed. With each death, his stats continued to shift. Next, his health points rose, but it still wasn't enough. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Yoshido clawed at the ground, getting back up once again. He called out to the death penalty, almost as if he were appealing to it like a deity, his eyes glowing brightly with determination. What he needed now was a stat increase that would allow him to deliver a fatal blow to his enemies. Another violent attack sent him crashing to the ground, and he was killed once more. His eyes snapped open as he was pulled into that limbo, like plane he entered whenever he died. Sitting up, he stared at his sweating hands, panting heavily as he pressed his palm to his face. The excruciating pain of death still lingered, and Yoshido sighed deeply, feeling the weight of his repeated deaths weighing on him. But despite the torment, he had finally gotten the stat boost he needed. His attack points had risen, and not just by a small margin. The increase was substantial, a 140-point boost. Before he could process his success, a new system window appeared in front of him, catching his attention, a respawn point, and Yoshido looked at it in confusion for a moment. He tapped his chin, pondering what this could mean, then a grin spread across his face. It didn't take long for him to figure it out, and he realized just how useful this feature could be. With a nod, he placed his hands on his legs and prepared himself to return to the battle. The system alerted him that he was about to be revived, and he felt himself returning to reality. He spoke out loud, a determined glint in his eyes. This time, it's my turn to end this. Yoshido now had the ability to designate a revival point, a specific location within 3 meters of where he had died. This ability was invaluable. In a regular scenario, it would allow him to avoid being trapped in situations where he would be forced to die again, like in lava or other perilous locations. But in battle, it gave him the potential to reappear in an opponent's blind spot, giving him a tactical advantage. He knew this was the game changer he needed. Yoshido noticed the shocked and worried expressions on Yuri and Mana's faces as they watched him. With determination, he stepped behind the Orc Emperor, preparing himself for the next move. Activating his respawn ability, he drew his silver sword, getting ready for the battle ahead. With his newfound attack power, he leaped into the air, descending upon the Orc Emperor's back. His sword landed with a solid hit, surprising both the monster and the 2 women. They stared in disbelief at how quickly he had closed the distance, but Yoshido was just as surprised at how it must have appeared to them. The Orc Emperor roared in fury, swiftly turning around to face him, slashing wildly with its claws. However, Yoshido easily dodged the attack and landed gracefully back on the ground, unharmed. He addressed the orc, his voice steady as he spoke about Nushi and the others, calling them out for being bullies. But he made it clear that even though they were awful people, he never once believed they deserved to die fighting a magic tower's boss. Yoshido's thoughts lingered on the possibility of acquiring a unique item, but more than that, he desired the defeat of the Orc Emperor. With his sword ready, he watched the orc try to claw at him again. This time, however, the orc was caught off guard. Its eyes widened in surprise as Yoshido dashed past its arm, running up the monster's massive body with precision and speed. Before the orc could react, Yoshido slashed through its face in a final, decisive blow. The Orc Emperor fell to the ground, defeated, its massive blade clattering away as it collapsed. Yoshido stood a short distance away, watching as the system message confirmed his victory. He had successfully defeated the boss of the magic tower. The rewards, a unique piece of equipment and a magic stone, were automatically sent to his inventory. Although Yoshido was pleased, there was a lingering sense of mixed feelings within him about the whole ordeal. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, contemplating the situation, when suddenly, Yuri ran toward him, tackling him into a hug from behind. Surprised, he stood frozen for a moment as she nuzzled against his back, her face flushed from all the tears she had shed. With a sigh of relief, she whispered her thanks, glad that he was safe. Yuri quickly realized what she had done, and her face turned bright red as she immediately pulled away from Yoshido, now looking at him with a shy expression. Manhwa walked over to him, offering her thanks as she awkwardly held her shoulder, mentioning that if Yoshido hadn't defeated the boss, both she and Yuri would have certainly died. However, the blonde woman couldn't help but express her frustration. She told Yoshido that his way of fighting was far too reckless, sacrificing himself repeatedly, like that had been painful to watch. She apologized for mentioning it, even though he had saved them. Yoshido, understanding her concern, placed a hand gently on her head and reassured her, telling her not to worry. He also apologized for making them witness his repeated deaths. Despite all the failures, he would always come back. Yoshido paused for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. Then, in an exaggerated dramatic tone, he shouted about how all the deaths had truly hurt him. Manhwa was caught off guard by his sudden outburst and tried to calm him down, but Yoshido, in a more light-hearted mood now, sighed deeply. He assured them that he would do his best not to die again, causing both women to smile, relieved by his words. The ground suddenly trembled beneath them, and debris began to fall from the ceiling. The three of them looked around in shock, quickly realizing what was happening. A system message appeared in the air, notifying them that the boss of the magic tower had been defeated, and the tower would disappear in 10 seconds. They would be forcefully relocated. Yuri sighed in realization, remembering that the tower would vanish after the boss was defeated. Yoshido waved at the two women and said they should meet again outside. As they were in the process of being teleported out, he glanced back at the lifeless bodies of Nushi and his comrades. He looked down with a hint of sadness, murmuring that he wouldn't forget them, even though they hadn't always been kind to him. The ground outside the tower began to rumble before it eventually disappeared, taking everything inside with it. The city returned to its normal state. Elsewhere, a woman received the news and was stunned, unable to believe that Hermes had been conquered, especially since it wasn't even supposed to be halfway completed yet. The messenger handed her the file and confirmed that the tower's disappearance was genuine. As the long-haired woman glanced at the file, the male messenger informed her that a detailed report would be arriving shortly. She let out a small huff and set the tablet down, her lips curling into a grin as she remarked, "This is starting to get interesting." Yoshido suddenly snapped his eyes open after being teleported out of the tower. He lifted himself off the ground, hearing surprised murmurs from those around him. People in the city stopped in their tracks and looked up in shock as they saw the Tower of Hermes slowly fading away. Proof that it had truly been defeated. The dark-haired male stared at the sight in disbelief, still processing the whirlwind of events that had unfolded in such a short span of time. He glanced at his hand, clenching it into a fist. Yoshido felt a surge of excitement as he realized that he had actually conquered a tower all on his own. He grinned as he watched it vanish before his eyes, savoring the victory. However, his smile slowly faded as he came to the realization that he was the only one who could truly celebrate such an accomplishment. He overheard a conversation nearby, where people were discussing the surprise of Hermes' defeat. Many were wondering how it was even possible since the tower hadn't been explored beyond the 5th floor yet. The crowd was starting to believe that some random, powerful individual must have taken down the boss. Yoshido listened intently, eager to hear more, but held back from revealing his identity. He desperately wanted to stand up and shout that he was the one who defeated the boss, but he held back, knowing that it wouldn't be wise. If no one had been killed, he would have proudly announced it without hesitation. Conquering the magic tower had done wonders for his self-confidence, but Yoshido reminded himself not to get carried away. Looking up at the sky, Yoshido prepared for his next move, but as he glanced around, he noticed everyone still staring and talking in shock about the tower's sudden disappearance. He decided it was best to keep his victory a secret for now. Not wanting to attract too much attention, he tried to slip away from the crowd quietly, sneaking through until Yudi and Mana noticed him. Both ran toward him, but Mana was the most excited, eagerly asking him about the unique equipment he had earned from defeating the boss. Her voice was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, causing an abrupt silence to fall over the crowd. As the people around Yoshido began to realize who he was, memories of him selling the infinite revival skill surfaced, and they began to recall how they had dismissed it as useless. They couldn't believe that this was the same person who had just conquered the Tower of Hermes. After a while of dealing with the confusion, questions, and stares, Yoshido and the two women managed to escape to a quieter area. The dark-haired male bought himself a drink from a nearby vending machine and let out a sigh of relief. It felt like a small victory to be away from the crowd of people who had bombarded them with questions about how he defeated the boss, asked him to join their parties, or even still held a grudge against him. Mana apologized for being so loud and careless earlier, but Yoshido reassured her that it was no big deal. Yudi, in a more lighthearted tone, laughed, mentioning how Yoshido had taken down the boss of a magic tower and became the dominator of Hermes. She said it was inevitable that he would become the center of attention. Yoshido paused for a moment, contemplating the title. It felt strange to him, especially since just recently, he had been nothing more than a weak challenger. He reflected on how buying the skill stone for infinite revival hadn't been a mistake after all. This made Yudi curious, and she asked about it, mentioning that she had heard about the skill's negative side effects. Yoshido hesitated, unsure how to explain it properly. The words stuck in his mind, and before he could respond, Yudi quickly apologized, sensing his discomfort. Deciding to keep the details of his ability to revive to himself for now, Yoshido listened as Mana spoke up again, eager to ask about the reward he received for defeating the boss. He told her to calm down and, tossing his empty drink aside, struggled to open his inventory. He knew the problem wasn't that he couldn't open it, but that they were outside the magic tower now. The inventory window could only be accessed while inside a magic tower, and the use of stats, skills, and various other features was limited to that environment. This system helped prevent challengers from causing trouble in normal society. However, there was one exception: challengers could use their powers at the sites of magic towers. With this in mind, the trio made their way to the location where the tower had once stood. As they passed through the faint green barrier that marked the area, Yoshido felt a strange aura fill the air. Finally, with the right conditions, he was able to open the inventory window. The two women gathered around him, eager to see what he had received. To their surprise, it was a unique weapon called Phos Aminos. The weapon's ability seemed to summon a force of wind when wielded, and as Yoshido summoned it, the air around him glowed brightly. In an instant, a large blade materialized in his hand, with red energy flowing through it. The women stared at the weapon in awe. As Yoshido swung the sword around effortlessly, he grinned, impressed by how lightweight it was, mentioning how easy it was to handle and expressing his excitement for future Magic Tower conquests. Yuri, blushing awkwardly, fidgeted with her fingers, while Mana caught on to the situation. The blonde woman chuckled and walked up to Yoshido, asking if he would be interested in forming a party together from the start next time. Flustered, Yuri jumped into the conversation, raising her hand and eagerly saying that she wanted to join as well. Realizing how forward she was being, Yuri's face turned even redder, and she began waving her hands around frantically in embarrassment. Yuri, still a bit shy, decided to be more formal and asked if she could join their party. Yoshido grinned and assured her that she was already welcome since they were close friends. The two women smiled at each other, clearly pleased with how things were going. Suddenly, Mana turned to them with a mischievous glint in her eyes and a smirk on her face, her mind already on the next step of their adventure. Yoshido couldn't help but wonder what was on Mana's mind as she suddenly stepped forward and closed the distance between them, getting uncomfortably close to his face. He flinched, his face instantly flushed with a deep red as she asked with excitement, "Which magic tower should we go to next? Will it be something similar in scale to Herm's, or maybe even bigger?" Yuri, however, didn't seem as enthusiastic about the idea. Despite Mana's eagerness to tackle a higher-level tower, such as the legendary Zeus Tower, Yuri seemed hesitant. Yoshido hummed in thought, considering Mana's suggestion. But after a brief pause, he spoke up, shaking his head. "Actually, I have something else on my mind after leaving Hermes. There's somewhere I want to go right away." Donning a smirk of his own, Yoshido's words took them both by surprise. Yuri, feeling a bit lost, sweat dropped at his words. "Where are you thinking of going?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. "I want to go to Tokyo," Yoshido said, a certain determination in his voice, and head straight to the Challenger's Management Bureau. There was a long moment of silence, and the two women exchanged puzzled looks. They clearly didn't understand why he wasn't considering another magic tower. Mana raised an eyebrow, but before she could ask more questions, Yoshido let out a sigh and in an exaggerated fashion, face-palmed. "The Bureau," he began, struggling to explain. "It's where you can buy and sell magic stones and other stuff at a much higher price than the stalls inside the magic towers. I want to exchange some of my items for money." Both women stood still not quite getting it, but as Yoshido elaborated, his tone became more serious. "I've spent all my life savings on the infinite revival skill, and now I'm completely broke, along with a lot of other debts I need to pay off." His expression became a bit more somber, as he realized how desperate his situation had become. The two women, still processing his words, stood there in silence for a while. Then, finally, after a moment of understanding, they agreed to follow him. Making their way to the Challenger's Management Bureau, Yoshido led them to the government-operated facility designed to support adventurers like themselves. The Bureau was a central hub, constantly updating information on each magic tower in real time. It was also where adventurers could buy and sell magic stones, weapons, and other items at fair prices. There were no rip-offs or overpriced items, which were common in the tower stalls. The Bureau was renowned for its fairness and transparency, something that made it highly valued by adventurers. The Bureau was built on the site of a former magic tower, which allowed challengers to use their powers freely within the Bureau, unlike in the outside world. This made the Bureau even more appealing for those looking to take advantage of the freedom it offered. As they walked through the Bureau's doors, Yoshido couldn't help but think about the rewards he had gained from conquering Hermes. Not only the unique weapons, but also the magic stones. He knew that selling these would help him get back on his feet. Financially, at least. Yoshido felt a surge of hope as he thought about finally being able to stabilize his finances. He hoped that the money from the exchange would bring him some relief. Walking up to the counter at the Challenger Management Bureau, he was greeted by the desk lady with a friendly smile. "Would you like to exchange your magic stones for money?" she asked. Yoshido nodded, pulling up his inventory window and summoning the magic stones. He paused as the sheer volume of stones appeared on the counter, the number far exceeding what he expected. Both he and the lady were shocked at the sight of the pile. Is this normal? He wondered aloud, unsure if this was a typical reward for clearing a tower. The lady at the counter's sweat dropped, clearly taken aback by the sheer quantity. After a few moments of counting, the lady cleared her throat and said, "All right, we'll proceed with the exchange process." Yoshido stood there, watching her work, and he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of disbelief at the magnitude of what he had just earned. Eventually, after the exchange was complete, Yoshido held a large envelope full of cash. His body trembled slightly in amazement at how wealthy he had suddenly become. "I can actually afford some things now," he thought, his mind racing with possibilities of how he could spend the money. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he couldn't shake the excitement of not having to worry about his debts anymore. Walking over to Yudi and Mana, who were waiting patiently, he showed them the envelope with a grin. However, Mana, ever the practical one, immediately frowned. "Don't get too carried away," she warned. "We don't want you ending up in more debt. Be careful with how you spend this." Yoshido sighed and nodded reluctantly. Yeah, I'll be careful. I get it," he replied, though part of him was itching to splurge. Still, he respected Mana's advice and understood that he had to be responsible, especially after everything that had happened. It was then that a voice interrupted his thoughts, sending a chill down his spine. A woman's voice rang out. "There you are. I've been looking for you." Yoshido froze and turned around instinctively, the intensity of the aura around the speaker sending a shiver through him. The woman who spoke was radiating an intimidating presence, and Yoshido instinctively took a step back. She continued, her voice confident and sharp. "I heard you were here at the bureau. I wanted to speak with you." As she walked closer, Yoshido's mind raced, trying to place her face. She was tall with long dark hair and a calm, almost unsettling confidence. Her eyes glinted with a knowing glimmer as she introduced herself. "I'm our